The Scape Ore Swamp Investigation. A cryptozoologist's account. Dr. Marion Thatcher, independent cryptozoologist. Field report. Lizard man of Scape Ore Swamp. Lee County, South Carolina. September 2025. Day 1. Arrival. The drive from Charleston to Bishopville takes you through a different South Carolina than the one tourist's photograph. Spanish moss gives way to scraggly pine, and the grand plantations dissolve into trailer parks and shuttered gas stations. By the time you reach Lee County, you understand that this is a place where people hold onto their stories because they have little else to hold. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, the heat still oppressive despite the calendar claiming we were well into September. My credentials as a cryptozoologist are modest: a PhD in anthropology from a state school, 2 self-published books on American folkloric creatures, and a YouTube channel with 43,000 subscribers who appreciate my refusal to sensationalize. I'm not here to prove the lizard man exists. I'm here to understand why people believe it does. The Scape Ore Swamp stretches across several thousand acres of Lee County, a dark tangle of bald cypress and tupelo gum that seems to swallow sound. Local historians claim the name comes from escape ore, suggesting the swamp once hid something valuable or dangerous that people sought to escape. Standing at its edge that first afternoon, I could believe either interpretation. I'd rented a room at the Bishopville Motor Lodge, a single-story establishment that had clearly seen better decades. The woman at the desk, whose name tag read Darlene, looked at me with the particular suspicion reserved for outsiders. "Hear about the lizard man, I expect?" she said, not making it a question. "I'm a researcher. I study folklore and cryptid sightings." "Aha!" She slid a key across the counter. "Room 7. Air conditioning works most of the time. You'll want to keep your door locked at night." "Is that general advice or specific to my research?" She smiled without warmth. "General advice. But around here, there's not much difference." The original account. Before conducting any interviews, I spent my first evening reviewing the foundational case, the 1988 Christopher Davis sighting that put the lizard man on the national map. I've read the reports dozens of times, but being here, in the actual geography of the event, demanded a fresh examination. The facts, as reported to the Lee County Sheriff's Department on June 29, 1988. Christopher Davis, 17 years old, was driving home from work at approximately 2 a.m. He got a flat tire on a rural road near the Scape Ore Swamp. While changing the tire, he heard a thumping sound and turned to see a creature running toward his vehicle. Davis described it as roughly 7 feet tall, bipedal, with green scaly skin, red eyes, and 3 fingers on each hand. The creature reached the car as Davis dove inside. It jumped on the roof, causing the vehicle to rock violently. Davis accelerated while the creature clung to the car, reportedly tearing at the roof and side mirror. After roughly a quarter mile, it fell or jumped off. Davis drove straight to the sheriff's department, where deputies noted he appeared genuinely terrified. Physical evidence included scratches on the vehicle's roof and a damaged side mirror, though no definitive biological traces. What makes the Davis case compelling from a research perspective is its specificity. Christopher Davis didn't describe a vague monster. He provided consistent, detailed observations under questioning. The physical evidence, while not conclusive, existed. And Davis, by all accounts, had nothing to gain from fabrication. He didn't seek publicity and reportedly found the subsequent media attention distressing. I had the address where Davis lived in 1988. Tomorrow I would try to find him. If he still lived in the area, he'd be in his mid-50s now, old enough to have perspective, perhaps willing to revisit what happened. Day 2, Christopher Davis. Finding Christopher Davis proved easier than expected. A few discreet inquiries at the Bishopville Public Library led me to his current residence, a modest house on the outskirts of town with a neat yard and a pickup truck in the driveway. He answered the door wearing work clothes, grease under his fingernails. When I introduced myself and explained my research, his expression cycled through recognition, resignation, and finally a kind of tired acceptance. "Come on in," he said. "Wife's at work. I've got coffee on." We sat at his kitchen table, and I activated my digital recorder after receiving his permission. What follows is the relevant portion of our conversation. lightly edited for clarity. MT, Mr. Davis, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you've told this story before. CD, not in a long time. After the first couple years, I stopped talking about it. People made up their minds one way or the other, and nothing I said was going to change that. MT, do you still think about that night? CD, every time I drive past that stretch of road, which is often, since I work in Sumter. I take a different route when I can. MT, can you walk me through what happened? In your own words, as you remember it. CD, long pause. I was coming home from my shift at the restaurant. I washed dishes there, got off at 1:30, 2 in the morning. I was 17, had this piece of shit Ford that I'd bought with my own money. I was proud of that car, you understand? It wasn't much, but it was mine. I got the flat out near the swamp. There's not much out there even now, but back then there was nothing. No houses, no streetlights, just road and trees. I pulled over, got the jack out, started changing the tire. It was hot even that time of night. Humid. The kind of heat that sits on you. I heard something. A thump-thump sound, like someone running. Heavy footfalls. Figured it was a deer, maybe. We got plenty of deer. But then I turned around and saw it in my headlights. MT, what did you see? CD, a creature. 7 feet tall, maybe taller. Walking on 2 legs like a man. But it wasn't a man. Green skin, scaly like a reptile. Eyes that reflected the light red, like a dog's eyes do. But wrong. 3 fingers on each hand, thick and clawed. It ran at me. Not jogged. Not walked. Ran fast, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. I dropped the tire iron and jumped in the car. Slammed the door. It hit the car a second later, and I mean hit it. The whole vehicle rocked. Then it was on the roof and I could hear it up there. Scraping, pounding. I turned the key and the engine caught, thank God. Because that car didn't always start easy. I hit the gas and it held on. I could see its hand come down over the windshield, those 3 fingers splayed out. The claws scratched the glass. MT, how long did it stay on the car? CD, felt like forever. Probably 20, 30 seconds. I got up to maybe 40 miles an hour before it let go or fell off. I didn't stop to check. Drove straight to the sheriff's department. Tire still flat. Rim probably damaged. I didn't care. MT, the deputies documented damage to your vehicle. CD, scratches on the roof. Dents. Side mirror was torn half off. They took pictures, asked me questions for hours. They brought me back out to the scene the next morning in daylight. Found some marks in the dirt where I'd been parked, but nothing conclusive. No scales, no blood, nothing like that. Did you ever doubt what you saw? CD, every day. For years, I tried to convince myself it was something else. A bear, maybe, or a person in a costume trying to scare me. But bears don't run like that. They don't have 3 fingers. And who the hell would be out there in the middle of nowhere in a costume at 2 in the morning? For what? To scare some kid changing a tire? No, I know what I saw. I've made my peace with the fact that most people don't believe me. But I was there. I saw it. It was real. MT. Have you seen it since? CD, no. And I'm grateful for that. But I hear things sometimes. Stories from other people who've seen something out near the swamp. I don't seek them out, but word gets around in a small town. MT. What do you think it is? If you had to speculate. CD. Long pause. I don't know. Some kind of animal we haven't cataloged? A mutation? People say alligators can get big, and we've got plenty of those in the swamp. But alligators don't walk on 2 legs. They don't climb on cars. Sometimes I think it's something that's been here a long time, longer than us. The swamp is old, Dr. Thatcher. Deep and old. Maybe there are things in there we're not meant to find. We spoke for another 20 minutes, mostly about the aftermath, the media attention, the tourists, the way his life changed. Christopher Davis struck me as fundamentally honest. A man still processing an experience that defied his understanding of the world. If he fabricated the encounter, he's maintained the performance flawlessly for 37 years. After leaving Davis's home, I drove out to the location where the incident occurred. The road has been repaved, the shoulders widened slightly, but the essential geography remains unchanged. The swamp presses close on both sides, dark water visible through the trees. I parked where Davis estimated he'd been and stood in the late afternoon heat, listening. The swamp makes sounds. Birds, insects, the occasional splash of something moving through water. But underneath it all is a quality of stillness that feels intentional, as if the place is holding its breath. I took photographs, soil samples from the roadside, and made notes about sightlines and vegetation. Then I returned to my car, suddenly uncomfortable with the idea of standing there as the sun began to set. Day 3, the Sheriff's Department. The Lee County Sheriff's Department occupies a low brick building on Main Street. I'd called ahead and secured a meeting with Sheriff Wayne Trueluck, who'd been a deputy in 1988 and remembered the Davis case. Sheriff Trueluck was a large man in his 60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent significant time outdoors. He met me in his office, which was cluttered with files, coffee cups, and photographs of what I assumed were family members. "You're the cryptid researcher," he said, shaking my hand with a grip that suggested he could still handle physical confrontation if necessary. "Darlene at the Motor Lodge mentioned you'd checked in. Word travels fast. Small town. You wanted to ask about the Lizard Man incident. I've spoken with Christopher Davis. I was hoping to review the original reports from 1988, if that's possible." Trueluck leaned back in his chair. "I can show you the public record. But I'll tell you the same thing I told the reporters back then. We investigated thoroughly, and we didn't find evidence of a hoax. But you also didn't find evidence of an actual creature." "No, we didn't. But absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, as they say." He pulled a file from a cabinet and set it on the desk between us. "This is a copy of the incident report, witness statement, and photographs of vehicle damage. You can look through it here, but it doesn't leave this office." I spent the next hour reviewing the documents. The incident report was professional and detailed, noting the time Davis arrived at the station, 2:47 a.m., his demeanor, extremely agitated and frightened, and the physical evidence on his vehicle. Photographs showed clear scratches on the roof, 3 parallel marks, consistent with something dragged across the metal surface. The side mirror hung by wires, its housing cracked. Deputy Trueluck's notes from 1988 included this observation. Subject appears genuinely traumatized. No indication of substance use or mental impairment. Vehicle damage is real and significant. Unable to determine cause definitively. When I finished, Sheriff Trueluck leaned forward. "What's your professional opinion, Dr. Thatcher? You study this kind of thing." "I study reports of this kind of thing," I clarified. "There's a difference. Most cryptid sightings can be explained by misidentification, environmental factors, or deliberate hoaxes. But some cases, like this one, resist easy explanation." "That's a diplomatic answer. It's an honest one. What's your opinion, Sheriff? You were there. You saw Christopher Davis right after it happened." Trueluck was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I've been in law enforcement for 42 years. I've seen people lie, seen them confused, seen them mistaken about what they experienced. That kid wasn't lying. He believed absolutely that something attacked his car, and the damage was real. But I don't know what it was. Could have been a bear, though we checked with wildlife services and there were no reports of bears in that area. Could have been a person in some kind of costume, though that raises more questions than it answers. Or it could have been exactly what he said. Something we don't have a name for. Have there been other reports?" Trueluck's expression shifted slightly, guarded. "A few. Nothing as dramatic as the Davis incident, but enough to keep the story alive. People see things out near the swamp. Tracks, movement in the trees, eyes reflecting light where they shouldn't be. Most of it's probably nothing. Imagination, animals, tricks of the light. But not all of it?" He didn't answer directly. "If you're planning to go into the swamp, Dr. Thatcher, be careful. It's dangerous terrain. Snakes, alligators, sinkholes. Easy to get lost. People have died out there." "I'll be careful." "I hope so." He stood, indicating the meeting was over. And if you find anything, you let me know before you go public with it. This town's had enough circuses. The research. Back at the motor lodge, I spread my materials across the small desk and began compiling a timeline of lizard man reports. The Davis incident wasn't the beginning, though it was the most famous. The earliest documented reference I could find dated to 1972, when a man named William McNeil reported seeing a large reptilian creature crossing a road near the swamp. McNeil didn't go to authorities. He told his story to a local newspaper, which treated it as a curiosity piece. No follow-up investigation occurred. In 1982, a fisherman named James Collier claimed something overturned his boat in the swamp's shallows. He described it as big, green, and moving fast. The sheriff's department investigated and concluded that Collier had likely hit a submerged log or large alligator. After the Davis incident in 1988, reports multiplied. This is common in cryptid cases. A high-profile sighting creates a framework that encourages others to interpret ambiguous experiences through the same lens. Between 1988 and 2000, the sheriff's department fielded approximately 30 reports of lizard man sightings, though most were vague or secondhand. The reports tapered off in the 2000s, with only occasional mentions. Then, in 2008, a couple named Bob and Dixie Rawson found their van damaged in a manner similar to the Davis incident. Scratches on the hood, bite marks on the front fender. They'd parked overnight near the swamp, and when they returned the next morning, the damage was present. The Rawsons had no explanation but were skeptical about the lizard-man connection. Wildlife officials suggested a large animal, possibly a bear, though no bears were known to be in the area. In 2015, a church youth group camping near the swamp reported seeing a tall figure moving through the trees at dusk. The group leader, a woman named Sarah Jennings, filed a report with the sheriff's department. Deputies searched the area and found nothing unusual. The most recent report I could verify was from 2023, when a man named Tom Marsh claimed to have photographed something in the swamp. The photograph, which circulated on social media, showed a dark, upright figure among distant trees. Analysis suggested it could be a person, a bear, or an artifact of light and shadow. Marsh stood by his claim that it was the lizard man. Patterns emerged from the data. Sightings clustered near the swamp, particularly along its eastern edge. Most occurred at night or in low-light conditions. Multiple witnesses described bipedal movement, which distinguished these reports from typical alligator or bear sightings. The entity, if it existed, was described consistently as large, reptilian, and aggressive when encountered. But patterns don't equal proof. They suggest something, a real phenomenon, a cultural mythology, or a combination of both, but they don't provide answers. Day 4, the Rawsons. I tracked down Bob and Dixie Rawson through county records. They lived in a small house on the outskirts of Bishopville, surrounded by gardens and a few chickens pecking in the yard. When I called, Dixie was initially reluctant to discuss their 2008 experience, but Bob agreed to meet. They were in their early 70s, both retired from careers in education. Bob had been a high school science teacher, which immediately interested me. This wasn't someone prone to flights of fantasy. We sat on their screened porch, ceiling fans barely disturbing the humid air. Dixie brought sweet tea, and Bob pulled out a folder of photographs they'd taken of the van damage. MT, thank you both for seeing me. I understand you had an unusual experience in 2008. BR, we did. And before you ask, no, we don't think it was the lizard man. DR, Bob doesn't. I'm not sure what I think. MT, tell me what happened. BR, we'd been camping near the swamp. Not in it, just near it. There's a camping area off Route 15. Nothing fancy but decent enough. We'd spent the day hiking, came back to the van around sunset, had dinner, went to bed in the tent. DR, the van was locked. We always locked it when we camped. BR, next morning we get up and the van's been, well, attacked is the word that comes to mind. Scratches all over the hood, deep gouges. The front bumper had what looked like bite marks, punctures in the plastic. MT, did you hear anything during the night? DR, nothing. And that's what bothered me. Whatever did it, it must have made noise. The van was maybe 30 feet from our tent, but we slept right through it. BR? I'm a heavy sleeper. Dixie usually isn't. DR? I took a sleeping pill that night. I'd hurt my back on the hike. MT? The photographs show significant damage. BR? Yeah. Cost us $800 to repair. Insurance covered some of it, but they classified it as vandalism. MT? You don't think it was vandalism? BR? Out there? Middle of nowhere? What vandal is going to hike into a camping area in the middle of the night to scratch up an old van? And the bite marks? Those weren't made by a tool. Something bit the bumper hard enough to leave tooth impressions. MT, wildlife officials suggested it could have been a bear. BR? That's what they said. But I taught biology for 30 years. I know what bear tracks look like, what bear claw marks look like. This wasn't a bear. DR? We found tracks near the van. Not clear ones, but impressions in the dirt. Three-toed, Bob said. BR? I wouldn't swear to that. The ground was hard, and there'd been no rain. But yeah, what marks I could see suggested 3 digits, maybe 4. MT? But you're skeptical about the lizard man. BR? I'm skeptical about jumping to fantastical conclusions. Something damaged our van. Something big, strong, and probably nocturnal. Could it have been an undocumented species? Theoretically, yes. Is it more likely to be a known animal behaving unusually? Also yes. Dear, I think Bob wants it to be explainable. I think maybe some things aren't. MT, Dixie, what's your theory? Pause. I think the swamp is old. Really old. And I think there might be things living in there that we haven't found because they don't want to be found. The lizard man, maybe, or something like it. Something that's learned to avoid people most of the time but sometimes runs into us by accident. Bob rolled his eyes affectionately, but didn't argue. They showed me the rest of their photographs, close-ups of the scratches, the bite marks, the camping site. The damage was real and extensive. Whatever had caused it possessed significant strength. Before I left, Bob pulled me aside. Dr. Thatcher, I'm a scientist. I believe in evidence and rational explanation. But I'll tell you this, I've never gone camping near that swamp again. And I don't plan to. Into the swamp. I'd been avoiding the obvious next step, but my research demanded it. I needed to enter the Scape Ore Swamp itself to understand its geography and ecology, to see what Christopher Davis and the others had seen. I spent a day preparing, checking my equipment, purchasing supplies, informing Sheriff Trueluck of my plans. He wasn't happy about it, but gave me contact information for a local guide named Marcus Webb, who knew the swamp as well as anyone. Marcus Webb was a black man in his 40s who'd grown up in Lee County and spent much of his life hunting and fishing in the swamp. When I called, he was direct. You're looking for the lizard man. I'm conducting research. Aha, that'll be $200 for the day, cash. We go in at dawn, we're out by 3 p.m. I don't stay in there after dark. You've heard the stories. I've seen things, he said. We can talk about it tomorrow. Meet me at the boat landing off Route 15 at 6 a.m. Day 6. The expedition. Dawn in the swamp was a revelation. The water, which appeared black in daylight, revealed itself in shades of copper and amber as the sun rose. Mist hung in layers, and the sound was overwhelming. Birds, insects, frogs creating a constant backdrop of life. Marcus had a small aluminum boat with an outboard motor. We loaded my equipment, cameras, audio recorders, sample collection supplies, and pushed off into the dark water. Stay seated, Marcus instructed. Water's only 2-3 feet deep in most places, but the bottom's soft. You go in, you might not come out. We motored slowly through channels barely wider than the boat, cypress trees pressing in on both sides. Spanish moss brushed our heads. The air smelled of decay and growing things, that particular scent of wetlands that's both attractive and repulsive. You've seen things, I prompted after we'd been moving for 20 minutes. What kind of things? Marcus was quiet, navigating around a submerged log. I've been coming into this swamp since I was a kid. My grandfather taught me to fish here, to hunt. I know this place, but there are parts one don't go. Parts where the water changes color, where the birds don't sing. Superstition. Experience. You feel it when you get close, like the air gets heavier. Animals act different. You hear sounds that don't match any animal you know. Have you seen the lizard man? Not directly, but I've seen tracks. Big three-toed tracks in mud where nothing should be walking. I've heard something large moving through the water at night, something that didn't move like an alligator. And once, about 10 years ago, I was fishing near sunset and saw something standing on the bank maybe 50 yards away. What did it look like? Tall, upright like a person, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the head too small. It stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then turned and walked into the trees. Didn't splash, didn't make noise. Just gone. Did you investigate? Marcus gave me a look that suggested I'd asked a stupid question. Hell no, I didn't investigate. I started the motor and got out of there. Some things you don't chase, Dr. Thatcher. Some things chase you. We continued deeper into the swamp. Marcus pointed out wildlife. An alligator sunning on a log, a water moccasin draped over a branch, a heron standing motionless in the shallows. The ecosystem was thriving and diverse. If something large and unknown lived here, it would need food, shelter, territory. The swamp could theoretically support it. Around noon, Marcus cut the motor and let us drift in a particularly isolated area. The cypress trees here were massive, their bases flared wide, their roots creating a maze of channels and pools. The water was darker, the air still. This is the deepest part, Marcus said quietly. Nobody comes here much. Too easy to get lost. I activated my audio recorder and spent several minutes documenting the ambient sound. Then I noticed something on a nearby cypress. Scratches in the bark, about 7 feet up, 3 parallel marks. Marcus, look at this. He guided the boat closer. We both examined the marks. They were old, weathered, but distinct. Could be a bear, Marcus said. Could be. But you don't think so. I photographed the marks from multiple angles. Bears mark territory with claw marks, but these are higher than most bear signs. And the spacing is unusual, wider than typical bear claws. We found 2 more trees with similar marks within 50 yards. All were at approximately the same height, all showed 3 distinct scratches. I took bark samples for analysis, though I had no illusion that they'd reveal anything definitive. As we prepared to leave the area, I heard something. A splash, larger than the ambient sounds we'd been hearing all morning. Both Marcus and I turned toward it. 50 feet away, the water rippled in expanding circles, but I saw nothing break the surface. Gator, Marcus said, but his hand had moved to the motor's pull cord, ready to start it quickly. Probably. We watched the water for another minute. Nothing appeared. Marcus started the motor, and we began the journey back to the landing. You get what you needed? He asked as we neared the exit. I don't know yet. Maybe. Let me tell you something my grandfather told me, Marcus said. He said the swamp keeps secrets. Not every secret is worth knowing. You understand what I'm saying? I think so. Good. Because if that thing is real, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, but if it's real, maybe there's a reason it stayed hidden this long. Maybe it wants to stay that way. Day 7. Analysis. Back at the motor lodge, I spent the evening reviewing my recordings and photographs. The scratch marks on the trees were suggestive but not conclusive. The bark samples would need to be sent to a laboratory for analysis, and even then, they'd likely only tell me what had damaged the bark, not what had caused the damage. I listened to the audio recordings through headphones, filtering for unusual sounds. Most of what I heard was explainable. Birds, insects, water movement, wind through trees. But at one point, approximately 43 minutes into the recording, there was a sound that didn't fit. A low vocalization, almost like a grunt or growl, lasting perhaps 2 seconds. It was distant, muffled by the general swamp sounds, but present. I ran the audio through a spectrogram analysis program. The vocalization showed frequency patterns inconsistent with alligators, which typically produce sounds in the 50 to 100 Hz range. This was higher, around 200 Hz, with harmonics suggesting a more complex vocal structure. Could have been a wild boar, though the duration and quality didn't quite match. Could have been something else. I was beginning to understand the frustration cryptozoologists face. Everything was suggestive, nothing was definitive. I had scratches that might be from a bear or might be from something else. I had audio that might be a known animal or might not be. I had witness testimony from credible people who believed they'd seen something unusual. But I didn't have proof. Day 8. Sarah Jennings. Sarah Jennings, the youth group leader who'd reported a sighting in 2015, agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Bishopville. She was in her mid-40s, a middle school teacher with a reputation for being sensible and level-headed. She was also reluctant to discuss what her group had seen. Dr. Thatcher, I agreed to meet with you because I believe you're approaching this seriously, she said after we'd ordered. But I want you to understand what happened scared some of those kids. I don't want it sensationalized. I'm not here to sensationalize anything. I'm trying to understand. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. It was a weekend camping trip, part of our church's summer program. 12 kids, ages 13 to 16, plus myself and 2 other adult volunteers. We'd gotten permission to camp on private land near the swamp. The owner was a church member. He said it would be fine. Saturday evening, we'd finished dinner and were doing activities around the campfire. Games, songs, that sort of thing. It was starting to get dark, maybe 8:30. One of the kids, a girl named Emma, said she saw something moving in the trees beyond the campfire light. At first, I thought she was trying to scare the other kids. You know how they do. But she seemed genuinely unsettled. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it where she was pointing. And I saw it. MT, what did you see? SJ, a figure. Tall, maybe 7 feet, standing between 2 trees about 30 yards from our camp. It was bipedal, standing upright like a person, but the proportions were wrong. The torso was too thick, the arms too long. And the way it stood, perfectly still like it was watching us. MT. Could it have been a person? SJ. That's what I tried to tell myself. But this was private land in the middle of nowhere. Who would be standing out there in the trees watching a youth group? And when I shined the light on it, I saw eyes. They reflected the light back, bright and red-orange, like an animal's eyes do. People's eyes don't do that. MT, what happened next? SJ, it moved. Not quickly, not aggressively. It just turned and walked deeper into the trees. I watched it disappear, and then I told the kids we were going to play games inside the tents for the rest of the evening. MT, did you report it to the authorities? SJ, the next day. I wasn't sure I should. I didn't want people thinking I was crazy. But some of the kids were really scared, and I thought the sheriff should know something was out there. They sent a deputy to look around, but he didn't find anything. MT, how many of the kids saw it? SJ, 5 of them saw it clearly. The rest saw something but weren't sure what. And Dr. Thatcher, these were good kids. Not troublemakers, not liars. They saw what I saw. MT, have you been back to that area? SJ, no. And I won't be. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. I know how that sounds, but I'm telling you what I know to be true. Before I left, Sarah Jennings said something that stayed with me. People want explanations. They want things to fit into categories they understand. But sometimes things don't fit. Sometimes you see something that breaks your understanding of how the world works, and you have to decide whether you're going to believe your own eyes or what everyone tells you is possible. The problem of proof. That evening, I sat in my motel room and confronted the central problem of cryptozoology. The burden of proof is impossibly high, yet the absence of proof doesn't equal proof of absence. For the lizard man to exist, it would need to meet several criteria. A viable population. A single organism wouldn't survive long. There would need to be a breeding population, which suggests dozens if not hundreds of individuals. Sufficient food supply. A 7-foot reptilian creature would require substantial caloric intake. The swamp has abundant wildlife, but would it support a population of large predators beyond the alligators already present? Evolutionary origin. Where did such a creature come from? Is it a surviving remnant of a prehistoric species? A mutation? An unknown branch of reptilian evolution? Successful concealment. How has such a population avoided definitive documentation despite numerous searches and the prevalence of trail cameras and smartphones? Each of these criteria presents significant challenges. Yet the alternative, that dozens of credible witnesses over 40 years have misidentified known animals or fabricated encounters, presents its own difficulties. I thought about Christopher Davis, whose life changed because of one encounter. Bob Rawson, the science teacher who couldn't explain the damage to his van. Sarah Jennings, watching something disappear into the trees. Marcus Webb, who'd spent his life in the swamp and refused to enter certain areas after dark. These weren't fabulists or attention seekers. They were ordinary people who'd experienced something extraordinary and were left to reconcile that experience with their understanding of reality. Day 9, Tom Marsh. Tom Marsh, who'd photographed something in the swamp in 2023, lived in a trailer on the edge of Lee County. When I called, he was immediately eager to discuss his experience, which made me slightly wary. In my experience, the most credible witnesses are often reluctant to talk. Still, I agreed to meet him. He was in his 30s, worked as a mechanic, and had a wall in his trailer dedicated to lizardman research, newspaper clippings, printouts from websites, his own photographs and maps with areas marked in red ink. "I've been tracking it for years," he told me, gesturing to the wall. "Ever since I saw it myself in 2023. MT, tell me about your sighting." TM, I was out in the swamp taking photos. I do wildlife photography as a hobby. It was late afternoon, good light, and I was near the eastern edge where the water's shallower. I had my telephoto lens on, scanning for birds or maybe an alligator. Then I saw movement in the trees. Something big moving upright. I thought maybe it was a person, but we were way off any trail. I raised my camera and got the shot before it moved deeper into the cover. MT, the photograph you posted online. TM, yeah. People said it could be anything, a person, a bear, shadows. But I was there. I saw it through my lens. It was walking on two legs, and it was too tall to be a person. The skin looked wrong, too. Dark green, textured. MT, how far away was it? TM, maybe 80 yards. Far enough that the detail isn't perfect, but close enough to see it was something unusual. I examined the photograph on his laptop. It showed a dark, upright figure partially obscured by trees. The image quality was decent but not exceptional. Exactly what you'd expect from a telephoto shot at that distance through dense vegetation. The figure could have been many things. MT, did you try to get closer? TM, I started to, but then I heard something. A hiss, really loud, like steam escaping but deeper. It came from where the figure had been. I decided not to push my luck. MT, have you seen it since? TM, not seen, but I found evidence. Tracks, tree markings, disturbed vegetation. I've got coordinates marked on these maps. The pattern suggests it has a territory, maybe a circuit it follows. Tom Marsh was enthusiastic but not unhinged. His research, while amateur, showed genuine effort. The problem was that enthusiasm itself could bias observation. When you're looking for something specific, you tend to find patterns even in random data. Still, his mapped coordinates were interesting. They clustered in the eastern section of the swamp, with a secondary cluster to the south. Both areas were remote, difficult to access, and far from regular human activity. Tom, have you considered that you might be tracking multiple animals? The historical record. Back in my room, I spent hours researching the swamp's history. If something unusual lived there, perhaps the historical record would contain clues. Scape Ore Swamp has been a fixture of Lee County geography for thousands of years. Native American tribes inhabited the region, though they tended to avoid the deepest sections of the swamp. Early colonial records mention it rarely, and then only as an obstacle to settlement, a place where surveyors got lost and crops couldn't be planted. In the late 1700s, a plantation owner named Josiah Scape attempted to drain portions of the swamp for rice cultivation. His journals, preserved in the South Carolina Historical Society archives, included this entry from August 1794. The men refused to work in the southern section, claiming they hear terrible sounds after dark. They say the swamp is cursed, that it belongs to something that dwells in the deep water. I attribute this to superstition and the natural apprehension of slaves toward unfamiliar territory. Yet I confess the sounds are unusual. Last evening I heard what I can only describe as a bellowing hiss, quite unlike any animal I know. The drainage project was abandoned after 3 workers disappeared. The official explanation was drowning, but local legend suggested something took them. During the Civil War, the swamp served as a refuge for deserters and escaped slaves. A Union officer's report from 1864 mentioned that Confederate deserters hiding in the swamp reported encounters with a large reptilian creature, but dismissed this as the fevered imaginings of desperate men. In the 1920s, a logging company attempted to harvest cypress from the swamp. Operations were suspended after equipment was repeatedly vandalized, or so the company claimed. A foreman's report, found in county archives, tells a different story. Something is destroying our equipment. The men say they see a large creature moving through the swamp at night. 3 men have quit, claiming they will not return. Saw marks on trees suggest an animal of considerable size and strength. I recommend we cease operations until the creature is identified and relocated. The logging company never returned. These historical accounts were tantalizing but ultimately ambiguous. People in unfamiliar environments see things, hear things, interpret ambiguous stimuli through the lens of fear or cultural expectation. Yet the consistency across centuries was noteworthy: large, reptilian, aggressive when approached. Day 10, the night expedition. Against my better judgment and Sheriff Trueluck's explicit advice, I decided to spend a night near the swamp. Not in it, I wasn't suicidal, but close enough to potentially observe nocturnal activity. Marcus Webb refused to guide me for a night expedition, but he helped me select a location that was relatively safe. A raised observation blind used by duck hunters sat on the eastern edge of the swamp, accessible by a dirt road. I could reach it by vehicle, set up equipment, and observe without being directly exposed to the swamp's dangers. I arrived 2 hours before sunset, carrying night vision equipment, audio recorders, motion-activated cameras, and enough supplies to last until dawn. The blind was a simple wooden platform about 8 feet off the ground with a corrugated metal roof and 3 walls. It overlooked a stretch of open water maybe 40 yards across, with thick vegetation on the far side. Setting up the equipment took an hour. I positioned motion-activated cameras at ground level, pointing toward the water and the treeline. I mounted my night vision scope on a tripod, giving me a clear view of the area. Audio recorders went in multiple locations to provide triangulation if any sounds occurred. As the sun set, the swamp transformed. The daytime cacophony of birds diminished, replaced by the chirping of crickets and frogs. Darkness came quickly, a thick, tangible darkness that the stars barely penetrated. My night vision equipment rendered the landscape in shades of green and gray, everything slightly distorted but visible. I settled in to wait. Hours passed. I saw an alligator glide through the water, just its eyes and snout visible above the surface. Raccoons foraged along the bank. An owl called from somewhere to my left. Everything was normal, explicable, exactly what you'd expect from a southern swamp at night. Around midnight, the frogs stopped singing. The silence was sudden and total. One moment the air was filled with their trilling. The next, nothing. I'd read about this phenomenon. Prey animals falling silent when a predator enters the area. It's an instinctive response, a collective holding of breath. I scanned the treeline through my night vision scope. Nothing moved. The water was still. Minutes passed in absolute quiet. Then I heard it. A splash, deliberate and large, coming from my left. I swung the scope toward the sound. Something was moving through the shallow water, creating a wake. In the green-tinted image, I could see displaced water but couldn't quite make out the source. Whatever it was moved behind a cluster of cypress trees and disappeared from my view. I waited, barely breathing, hoping it would emerge on the other side. It did. For perhaps 3 seconds, I had a clear view through my scope of something moving through the water. It was upright, bipedal, moving with a kind of deliberate fluidity that didn't match any animal I knew. The height was significant. If the water was 2 feet deep, which I estimated it to be in that area, the creature stood at least 6 feet tall at the shoulder. Then it reached the far bank and moved into the vegetation. I caught a glimpse of what might have been a tail or trailing leg, and then nothing. My heart was pounding. I grabbed my audio recorder and quietly dictated what I'd seen, timestamping it. Then I checked my motion-activated cameras. 2 of them had been triggered, their red indicator lights blinking in the darkness. The frogs remained silent for another 10 minutes. Then, gradually, they began to call again, hesitantly at first, then with increasing confidence. Whatever had passed through had moved on. I spent the rest of the night in a state of heightened alertness, but nothing else unusual occurred. When the sky began to lighten around 5:30 a.m., I carefully climbed down from the blind and checked the ground around my cameras. I found tracks in the mud near the water's edge, large, 3-toed impressions pressed deep into the soft earth. I photographed them from multiple angles with scale references, then made plaster casts. The tracks showed clear digit marks, claws at the tips, and a stride pattern suggesting bipedal locomotion. Each track was approximately 14 inches long and 10 inches wide at the widest point. The evidence. Back at the motor lodge, I reviewed the night's footage and recordings. The motion-activated cameras had captured blurred images of something large moving past them, but the quality was insufficient for definitive identification. The movement was quick, the creature partly obscured by vegetation. But the audio was different. One of my recorders had picked up sounds during the period when the frogs fell silent. Using audio editing software, I isolated the relevant section and amplified it. What I heard was a series of respirations. Deep, rhythmic breathing that didn't match any animal I could identify. The pattern suggested large lung capacity, the breaths spaced about 6 seconds apart. There was also a vocalization, brief but clear. A low hiss followed by what sounded almost like a grunt. I ran it through comparative analysis with known animals. It didn't match alligators, bears, wild boar, or any large mammal in the region's ecosystem. The plaster casts of the tracks were still drying. When I could handle them, they'd need to be compared against known animal prints. But even before formal analysis, I could see they were unusual. The 3-toed structure was consistent with witness descriptions. The depth of the impressions suggested something with significant mass. I had evidence. Not proof. Evidence can be faked, misinterpreted, or explained away, but tangible documentation of something unusual in the Scape Ore Swamp. The question was what to do with it. Day 11. Dr. Patricia Valdez. Before drawing any conclusions, I needed a second opinion from someone with expertise in wildlife biology. I contacted Dr. Patricia Valdez, a herpetologist at the University of South Carolina who'd published extensively on reptile species in the state. We spoke by video call, and I shared my photographs, audio recordings, and track casts. She listened patiently, examining each piece of evidence with professional detachment. Dr. Thatcher, I appreciate you consulting me, she said after reviewing everything. These are interesting finds, but I need to be honest about their limitations. I understand. What's your assessment? The tracks are the most compelling evidence. The 3-toed structure could suggest a large bird, possibly a sandhill crane or a great blue heron, though the size is wrong. Both species have 3 forward-facing toes, but nothing this large has been documented in South Carolina. Alternatively, these could be alligator tracks where the 4th toe didn't register clearly in the mud. Alligators have 4 toes on their front feet and 5 on the back, but in certain substrates, not all digits leave clear impressions. The bipedal stride pattern you observed could be explained by an alligator walking on its hind legs briefly. They do this occasionally when navigating obstacles. The audio is harder to assess. The breathing pattern doesn't match any reptile I'm familiar with, but audio can be deceptive. Environmental factors, equipment placement, and post-processing can all affect interpretation. The vocalization might be a wild boar or even a large alligator. They produce more varied sounds than most people realize. What about the eyewitness accounts? Dr. Valdez hesitated. I'm a scientist, not a psychologist. People see what they expect to see, especially in low-light conditions and high-stress situations. A large alligator reared on its hind legs in the dark might very well appear to be something else. A black bear, though rare in Lee County, could be mistaken for a bipedal creature if observed briefly. That said, I won't dismiss the possibility of an unknown species outright. The swamp is a complex ecosystem, relatively unexplored in its deepest sections. Could something large and reptilian have escaped scientific documentation? It's unlikely, but unlikely isn't impossible. What would you need to see to be convinced? Clear, unambiguous photographic or video evidence. Multiple frames showing the creature from different angles in good lighting. Better yet, physical evidence, a body, bones, scales, biological samples with DNA. Without that, we're in the realm of speculation. It was a fair assessment. Dr. Valdez was doing what scientists should do, demanding rigorous proof before accepting extraordinary claims. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the standard of proof required would be nearly impossible to meet unless the creature chose to reveal itself. The interviews continue. Over the next 2 days, I conducted interviews with several other witnesses. Janice Meyer, a postal carrier who'd reported seeing something crossing the road near the swamp in 2019. She described it as like a person running but wrong, too fast, too low to the ground. She'd been driving and only saw it briefly, but the memory had stayed with her. Robert, Bobby Tillman, a teenager who'd been fishing with friends in 2021, when they heard loud splashing and saw something big moving through the water toward them. They'd fled without getting a clear look, but Bobby insisted it wasn't an alligator. I know what gators look like. This was different. It was coming at us. Eleanor Briggs, an elderly woman who'd lived in Lee County her entire life. She told me stories her grandmother had told her about the swamp devil, a creature that took livestock and scared hunters. We didn't call it the lizard man back then, she said, but it was the same thing. It's been here longer than any of us. Each interview added layers to the story but didn't fundamentally change the equation. People had experiences they couldn't explain. They interpreted those experiences through the framework available to them, a large reptilian creature that lived in the swamp. Whether that interpretation matched objective reality remained unclear. Day 13, return to the swamp. I convinced Marcus Webb to take me back into the swamp, this time to the specific areas Tom Marsh had marked on his maps. Marcus was reluctant but agreed after I increased his fee. We entered the swamp at dawn, following channels deeper than we'd gone before. The water here was darker, the trees more densely packed. This was the heart of the swamp, the oldest section, where the ecosystem had remained largely unchanged for centuries. Marcus guided us to an area where the water opened into a small pond, maybe 60 feet across, surrounded by massive cypress trees. The place had an odd quality, too quiet even for the swamp. The usual bird sounds were muted, distant. This is one of the places Tom marked, Marcus said quietly. I've been here once before. Didn't like it then, don't like it now. We circled the pond slowly. I scanned the banks for tracks, markings, anything unusual. On the far side, I found scratches on a tree trunk at approximately 7 feet high, 3 parallel marks, old but clear. Then I saw the den. It was barely visible, a hollow in the base of an enormous cypress where the roots created a cave-like opening. The entrance was partially submerged, but at low water it would be accessible. Vegetation had grown across the opening, creating natural camouflage. Marcus, look at this. He maneuvered the boat closer, though I could tell he didn't want to. We shined flashlights into the opening. The space extended back into the tree, a cavity large enough for something substantial to shelter in. The floor of the den was dry and showed signs of use. Flattened vegetation, what might have been shed scales or bark. I couldn't tell. There was a smell, too musty and reptilian, like the smell of alligators but different somehow. We should go, Marcus said. Let me take some samples. Dr. Thatcher, we should go now. Something in his voice made me look up. He was staring past me, toward the far side of the pond. I turned to follow his gaze. Something was in the water. Not on it, not fully submerged. Something just below the surface, creating a subtle wake as it moved. It was approaching the boat, steady and deliberate. Marcus started the motor, coughed, sputtered, and died. Shit, he muttered, pulling the cord again. The motor turned over but didn't catch. The wake was closer now, maybe 20 feet from the boat. I could see the disturbance it created in the water but couldn't make out what caused it. Marcus pulled the cord again. The motor roared to life and he immediately put it in gear. We accelerated away from the den, away from the approaching wake, back toward the channel we'd entered through. I looked back once. The wake had stopped moving. The water settled, became still. Whatever had been there was gone or waiting. Neither of us spoke until we were well away from that pond. Finally, Marcus said, "You get what you needed? I got samples from the den." "Good, because I'm not going back there. Not for any amount of money." "What do you think it was in the water?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I think the swamp has secrets, Dr. Thatcher. I think some of those secrets have teeth." The laboratory results. I sent the samples I'd collected, bark with scratches, material from the den floor, the plaster track casts, and audio recordings, to colleagues at various institutions for analysis. The results came back over the next week. Bark samples showed damage consistent with claws or talons. No biological residue could be extracted, but the force required to create such deep gouges suggested an animal of considerable size and strength. Den floor material contained traces of organic matter, including what appeared to be reptilian scales. DNA analysis was inconclusive due to contamination and degradation, but showed markers consistent with the order Crocodilia, crocodiles and alligators, while also containing anomalies that didn't match any known species in the genetic database. Track casts. Analysis by a forensic podiatrist indicated a bipedal creature with digitigrade foot structure, walking on toes rather than flat-footed. Weight distribution suggested an animal of 300 to 400 pounds. The three-toed structure didn't match any known animal in the region. Audio recordings. A bioacoustic specialist determined the vocalizations didn't match any cataloged animal sounds from the southeastern United States. The breathing pattern suggested a large animal with substantial lung capacity, possibly reptilian in nature based on the respiratory rhythm. The results were tantalizing but not definitive. The DNA anomalies could be explained by contamination or degradation. The tracks could theoretically be a hoax, though the remote location and the circumstances of their discovery made that unlikely. The audio could be misidentified known animals or environmental sounds. But taken together, the evidence suggested something was in the Scape Ore Swamp that didn't fit comfortably into known categories. Day 20. Final interviews. Before concluding my research, I returned to Christopher Davis one last time. He invited me to his back porch, where we sat watching the sun set over his property. "So, did you find it?" he asked. "Your proof." "I found evidence. Whether it constitutes proof depends on who you ask." "What do you believe, Dr. Thatcher?" After all this, I considered the question carefully. "I believe something is in that swamp. Something large, possibly reptilian, that's managed to avoid definitive documentation. Whether it's an unknown species, a rare or mutated known species, or something else entirely, I can't say with certainty." "But you saw something that night in the swamp, didn't you? When you went back with Marcus. How did you know about that?" "Small town. Word gets around." "What did you see?" "I saw something in the water. Something that moved with purpose toward our boat. I didn't get a clear look at it." Christopher Davis nodded slowly. "That's how it is with this thing. You see enough to know it's real, but never enough to prove it to anyone else. You're left with your own experience and the question of whether you trust your own eyes. Do you have any regrets about coming forward with your story?" "Sometimes. My life would have been simpler if I'd kept quiet. But I saw what I saw. Someone needed to say it out loud, even if most people didn't believe it. For what it's worth, I believe you saw something that night. Something that terrified you and left physical evidence. Whether we ever conclusively identify what it was is a different question." "That's all I ever wanted," he said. "For someone to take it seriously. Thank you for that." Conclusions. After 3 weeks in Lee County, I departed with more questions than answers, which is, perhaps, the nature of cryptozoological research. The lizard man of Scape Ore Swamp exists in a peculiar space between folklore and zoology. The witness accounts are too numerous and consistent to dismiss entirely, yet physical evidence remains frustratingly ambiguous. The swamp itself is vast and largely unexplored, providing theoretical habitat for something unknown, but also providing explanations for misidentifications and folklore. What I can say with confidence: multiple credible witnesses have reported encounters with a large, bipedal, reptilian creature in or near the Scape Ore Swamp over a period of more than 40 years. Physical evidence, tracks, claw marks, damaged vehicles, and audio recordings exists but is open to interpretation and alternative explanations. The swamp's ecosystem could theoretically support an unknown large predator, though the absence of definitive proof suggests either extreme rarity or non-existence. The cultural significance of the lizard man to Lee County is real and measurable, regardless of the creature's biological reality. What I believe personally is more complicated. I am a scientist, trained to demand evidence and resist unsupported conclusions. Yet I am also someone who stood in that swamp at night and felt the peculiar certainty that something was watching, who saw movement in the water that didn't match known animals, who spoke with honest people whose lives were changed by experiences they couldn't explain. The lizard man may be a misidentified alligator, a case of mass delusion, or a genuine unknown species. Until we have definitive physical evidence, all three possibilities remain open. What I can say is this: the Scape Ore Swamp holds secrets. Whether those secrets include a 7-foot reptilian biped or something equally strange but more explainable, the mystery endures. And perhaps that's appropriate. In an age where satellite imagery maps every corner of the globe and DNA analysis can identify species from a single hair, perhaps we need places that remain unknown. Perhaps we need creatures that exist just beyond the reach of certain knowledge, reminding us that the world is larger and stranger than our sciences can fully catalog. The swamp keeps its secrets. I've added my observations to the record, knowing they will convince some and satisfy none. The lizard man, real or imagined, will continue to haunt the dark waters of Lee County, and people like Christopher Davis will continue to know what they saw, regardless of what others believe. That, ultimately, is the truth I've uncovered, not about the creature, but about the human experience of encountering the unknown. Some mysteries refuse to be solved. Some things resist categorization. And sometimes, in the dark swamp water, something moves that shouldn't exist but does anyway. My research continues. Epilogue. 3 months after leaving Lee County, I received a package. No return address, postmarked from Bishopville. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Dr. Thatcher, found this on my trail camera 2 weeks after you left. Thought you should see it. Not sharing with anyone else. Some things should stay in the swamp.mw. The USB drive contained a single video file, dated October 15, 2025, 11:47 p.m. The footage showed a nighttime scene, infrared camera pointed at a game trail near water. For the first 30 seconds, nothing moved. Then something entered the frame from the right. It was large, bipedal, moving with an unhurried gait. The infrared rendering made details difficult to discern, but the creature was clearly upright, clearly not any known animal. It paused in the center of the frame, seemed to turn its head toward the camera, then continued off-screen to the left. Total time visible, 8 seconds. I watched the footage 17 times, analyzing every frame. It could be a hoax, someone in an elaborate costume. Could be a misidentified known animal. Could be exactly what it appeared to be. I haven't shared the footage. Marcus Webb asked me not to, and I'm respecting that request. Perhaps I'm also protecting myself from the inevitable scrutiny and skepticism that would follow. Or perhaps I've learned that some evidence is meant to be witnessed but not broadcast. Some mysteries preserved rather than solved. The lizard man remains uncatalogued, unproven, and undiscovered by science. But in the dark water of Scape Ore Swamp, something moves, something watches, something endures. And that, for now, is enough. End of field report. Dr. Marion Thatcher. November 2025.